Hello there, good evening, and welcome back to the Football Tribe YouTube channel. My name is Robert K. Sarkos, and thank you for tuning into the channel from wherever it is that you're catching this from. Thank you for taking the time for listening in. I hope the international break is treating you well and you catching up on some of those games as you may please. If you're from the Pearl of Africa, Uganda did lose by 2-1 against Guinea in the 2026 FIFA World Cup qualifiers there. So it's not looking pretty for the Ugandan side. But anyway, we'll cross over to the Premier League where Everton were docked 10 points for a breach of financial rules in the Premier League. Everton, who were standing in 14th place at 14 points, were docked 10 points that saw them drop to second from bottom, that's in 19th, with just 4 points and about 2 points from safety after that docking points. Now, it's a devastating and pretty harsh decision for Everton, who had seemed to sort of pick their pace after a horrible start to the Premier League season. But anyway, manager Sean Dyche will have to dig quite deep to save this Everton side from a relegation if he is to see out the season. But it doesn't stop at that. So the verdict from the independent Premier League committee that reviewed Everton's finances after it is reported that they made a loss of £124.5 million, which was by £19.5 million over the threshold of £105 million for which a Premier League is allowed to make losses in a period of over 3 years, did find that they had breached the Premier League profit and sustainability rules there. So after reviewing all their finances, it came down to the sanctions of docking them at 10 points. But it may not end at that, as some clubs that have been relegated during that period, including Leeds United, Southampton, Leicester City, and Burnley, may petition the Premier League over compensation. Now, clubs that have been relegated during that period of time may call to be compensated, which may force Everton to pay them millions of pounds in compensation. So, not good news for Everton, but I did find the decision quite very harsh. Everton were being reviewed, particularly for the season of 2021-2022, during which they made enormous losses. That's the key season in question. They were quite upfront with the authorities in terms of cooperating on the investigation. They did come forward. They were honest about it. They did give up the information that was needed to conduct the investigation, but the final verdict for them was pretty harsh. Reason as to why I personally think it was quite very harsh is the period in question. This was a period of, COVID-19. Clubs made huge losses. Everton had made, an investment quite in a number of players, which wasn't really paying off. They have their new stadium construction going on and all those things. But largely, the COVID period was a key, huge loss for everyone, for every club, and most businesses. You had fans that had been banned from coming to stadiums. That's in the period of 2020 and leading into 2021 because of the pandemic. Clubs had commitments to sort of continue, paying players and all that. I think Everton is one of the big clubs in Merseyside that continue to operate with the big budgets. But the decision comes at a time when they're under takeover by 777 Partners. I think it's a US-based investment group that is trying to take them over after majority owner, that is Fahad Moshiri, who owns a 94% stake in the club, agreed to sell. So it's been quite a number of factors that has culminated into this. But in part of Everton's defense, of course, they raised the issue of the pandemic. They also raised the issue in loss of finances after a stadium naming rights deal was cancelled by one of their financiers, that is Alisha Usmanov, the Russian billionaire. If you're an Arsenal fan, this name should ring a bell. He was a, minority stake owner in Arsenal a couple of years ago. So they had a deal in the region of 200 million pounds for stadium naming rights that crumbled uh, after Russia attacked Ukraine. So in the sanctions that were brought forward by the UK government, yeah, these are some of the deals that collapsed, and you had all these oligarchs being sanctioned by the UK and all other some other European countries, including the US. So it meant cancellation on their stadium naming rights that was in the deal worth about 200 million pounds, according to reports. So that also affected them. They've had the investments in players and things that haven't really worked out, but when you look at it all. Now, remember during the transfer window when I questioned their decision to sell Alex Iwobi to Fulham, I was wondering what's the best of this? I mean, why are they doing this? Not because he was one of their good players, yes, on a given day, but they had to sell him off. But anyway, it all revolves around the financials that even compel the Premier League to have to cap their wages on players. It also had to sort of have an oversight on all the deals that they were doing, especially in the transfer market, in who they were bringing in and at what, how much, and who they're trying to sell, and all those things. So everything came under scrutiny because of the financial situation that they found themselves in. In a course of 3 years, during that time, around the COVID period of time, they did record a loss of about 371, I think, 0.8 million pounds in losses. So that's quite an enormous loss. But those are some of the losses that were posted uh, during that spell of time. So it then compelled, Premier League clubs, including Leeds at the time, to ask the Premier League to further look into Everton whether their finances were in order, whether they were, adhering to the profit and sustainability rules. Now, remember the profit and sustainability rules. These are rules that were brought in the Premier League, I think, in around the 2014-2015 season or 2013-2014, around that time. This was premised on the back of UEFA bringing their financial fair play rules that were introduced in the 2011-2012 season. Now, UEFA had noticed a pattern where clubs were, overborrowing, sort of putting them at risk of high debt to keep to sustain their clubs. You had all these enormous investments in clubs from private equity and firms to in order in the form of trying to buy success. So they looked at the model and they thought it was not going to be very sustainable in the long run. So they introduced the financial fair play rules. So 2 years after that, the Premier League reviewed those rules and also decided to come up with their own rules, and then they introduced the profit and sustainability rules in which they stated that a club cannot make losses of more than 105 million pounds over a course of 3 years. So I think this is their way of trying to keep clubs in check. To say you're spending what you're making, uh, then you're not overreaching, and then eventually clubs collapse because of financial decisions and all that. I think Wigan was a culprit of financial misbehavior, and they ever since then they've been struggling. So to avoid a collapse of clubs, not that Wigan did collapse totally, but things are not been looking pretty for them. They had to drop down beyond the championship to League One and all that. So it's not been a pretty time. So in other words, Premier League came up with all this to keep the big clubs in check as well as the small clubs to ensure that they were surviving off they were making, so that making sure that they were keeping a watch over them to avoid to kind of control the situation of having them fall into trouble, whether it was from overborrowing and overspending and all those things. So that's why those rules were brought up. And if you do remember, Manchester City are also are having to defend themselves over a breach of some of these rules. I think they have about 115 charges that have been brought to their forward. However, Manchester City have claimed no wrongdoing and they're still trying to defend themselves. And in fact, Everton, in the statement that they did release after being docked those 10 points, they said they will be keeping a close eye on the decisions that will be taken against other clubs that are under investigation. Um, Chelsea being inclusive. Now, Chelsea also have their troubles. When Tony Body and his partners took over the club, I think sometime last year or slightly beyond, they did they did mention that there was an incorrect, declaration of financial information about the club between the period of 2012 and 2019. And UEFA reviewed that and they came to a settlement of about 8.7 million pounds in that settlement with the club. But then Chelsea continued to be under investigation for breach of these financial rules. Manchester City are under scrutiny over those rules. So we'll wait to see how all that spans out. And like I said, Everton will be keeping a close eye on that one to see how it all plays out. But that's the kind of situation that they do find themselves in, and what's really happening around the Premier League. So going forward, clubs will have to be more cautious on how they deal and how they report their finances, given this big precedent that has been set, because this is the biggest sanction or punishment that has been awarded to a Premier League club for being found in breach of those rules. So we'll have to keep a close attention on those stories relating to club performances, especially financially. And Manchester City, in the work of winning their treble, they did, uh, announce big revenues or that were in the region of 700 million pounds plus, uh, 500 of which were spent on wages, transfers and all that, among other things. But that doesn't take away the fact that they are being investigated, because last season they did perform well, they did win the treble, so they had all victory cash prizes that they were winning from the Champions League, from the Premier League, winning the FA, although that's small, but they did make quite a huge chunk of money. But that's not to say that they won't be investigated any further, because their breaches date far back to periods of 2018-19 and much lower than that. So anyway, we'll keep a close eye on that story and more. But that's it from the Premier League on the side of everything Everton and then being docked points and all that. That's it. That's all I had for you from the Football Tribe News Desk. Keep it locked on the channel. Do not forget to like, comment, and share, as well as subscribe and turn those notifications on so that you can be notified when we do release video. Thank you and stay blessed.